Hello everyone, Carlo and Dylan here from All You Can Board, and today we are reviewing a very exciting game called Oath, Chronicles of Empire and Exile. This is
what a beauty. It's
absolutely
so
beautiful game. This is designed by Cole Worley, same designer as Root, probably his most popular game. Beautiful artwork by Kyle Farron and published by Leader Games. Right away, we will mention this was sent to us as a review copy from the publisher. So Dylan's going to start by giving a bit of an overview as to what goes on in the game. We're obviously not going to cover all the rules because there is a lot to cover here. There's some excellent videos online. We can link a couple in the description below. And then we're going to tell you what we did and didn't like and then give you our final thoughts at the end. So yeah, take it away.
Yeah, there is tons going on here. So again, this is going to be very brief and, just me running through it. Check the description for the full overview. But basically in Oath, there's going to be one person that's playing the Chancellor, and there's going to be a bunch of people that are starting, at least in the first playthrough, playing as Exiles. And the entire goal is the Chancellor's trying to keep control and remain the Chancellor, and all the other players are basically trying to find another way to become the Chancellor, whether that be from usurping the throne, whether that be by becoming a citizen and having this secondary win condition. But there are a bunch of different win conditions. So as an exile, you might have your own private vision card that you have that is going to give you your own secret goal that you have for a part of it, and then eventually becomes a public goal that could win you the game. The Chancellor can make people citizens if they see that the game is getting away from them and they need to regain control, and they can make other people citizens to help them out. But those citizens will have secondary ways to win the game that if the Chancellor would win, now the citizen wins if this condition is met. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can win the game, and it's a game with a bunch of different areas on the board. Beautiful board, it's got some area control aspects to it where depending on what the win condition is, it might be a bigger factor. You can have different units on different areas of the board, as well as different units on your actual personal player board that add to your power, and you're trying to campaign and gain control of different areas, and that also gives you access to the cards that are tied to that area as well, and some battle plans that can help you in campaigning. On your turn, you basically have a bunch of supply. You're going to be using that supply to take a bunch of different possible actions, whether that be searching for cards through the discard piles or the actual world deck, whether that be campaigning, whether that be doing some trading to get different resources like favor and secrets. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on in this game.
Muster to strengthen your army.
Yeah, like you're strengthening your army on your board through mustering. There's so much going on that there's no way for me to summarize it all. Hopefully you get a little bit of an idea of what's going on, but generally I think if you want to learn more about it from a rules perspective, check out one of those rules videos.
One other thing I want to mention just real quick is that it can play over a maximum of 8 rounds. If it gets to the end of the 8th round, the game will automatically end, but it can end much earlier. Yeah. From the 5th round onwards, there's a die roll that can happen where someone, if they roll a certain die, it'll trigger the end of the game, or if one of those visions or other things. So there are ways the game can end earlier, but at most it'll be 8 rounds.
And it is a 2 to 6 player game, so there's a special 2-player mode. We'll get into that a little bit later. It's not designed as a 2-player game, I don't think. 3 to 6 is generally like where you want to try to sit, but it can get pretty wild with 6 players as well. So
yeah, should we touch on the kind of like, not legacy because it's not quite a legacy game, element as well?
Yeah, sure.
What we like.
It's a campaign game that isn't the same as maybe like a Pandemic Legacy or like a Gloomhaven, where you're bringing the same group and continuing the same story. You are continuing the same story and lineage, but it's very much easier, I would say, in this game to have one person drop in or drop out. The more you can keep the same group going, the more the experience is going to just resonate with you. But I think that as long as you keep the person who's won the last game, which becomes the Chancellor, you do get to keep some of that essence, and it's one that, you're changing the game based on your actions and everything, but it's not that's where the extent of the legacy aspects come from. Yes. Is the game changes on what cards are going to be out, but the rules stay the same otherwise. They're just going to be altered by which cards happen to be in the game. So it's a different kind of legacy campaign experience. You're not tearing anything up. There's cards that get eliminated and go to a section of your box, but those can even be brought back at some point. So
and there's no end to the campaign. There's no we beat the campaign. The game goes on forever. It's just that every time it's going to be different because things go back into the box, the setup changes, so it's just something that evolves over time, but it doesn't have an end like a campaign would.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to start with what we liked, and the first thing I'm going to touch on, because I think it's one of the things that completely caught my eye right from the get-go, is the quality of the components and the art and everything. We got sent the deluxe edition, and it is absolutely beautiful. It's got this amazing rollout board that's
like a neoprene mat.
Like beautiful colorful. We all the secrets are actual little books that are just like they're just amazing to actually hold and work with.
They have
like
a nice sound to them.
Yeah, like they just
hefty,
are amazing. The coins have some great heft to them, and designs on both sides of them. They're metal. There's different colored dice. There's like orange dice and blue dice for attacking and defending that are being used.
Look at the little meeples too. The engraved,
Yeah,
look at yours too. They're all shaped. They have different colors.
One color for each of the
super nice stuff.
The players, the Chancellor board, like. I can't get over the component quality in this. Show them the Chronicle book too. Like there's this leather-bound book here, like that you actually can like write in and have your entire like history of the game going on and stuff like that. But they give you one of those to keep chronicled. Like
even all the cards in the decks that come out, or these decks here, as well as the location cards, all have unique artwork. It's done by the same artist again, Kyle Farron, who did the art in Root, if you're familiar with it.
So the sleeves are amazing too. Like it just everything about it is phenomenal. So in terms of table presence, in terms of like when we had our friends over to play out our sessions of this, I think everyone was just blown away by that aspect. There was no complaints. Everyone loved to actually get their hands on the game itself, and that's something that just like right from the get-go puts you like in the exact right mindset to play Oath. So
yeah, it really adds to the level of immersion in the game when everything looks this good.
Yeah, for sure. So that was the first thing I liked. Do you want to throw it to one of the things you really like?
Sure. So the next thing we're going to get to is the kind of story and narrative that comes through this game, and I think what made it stand out so much to me is that like I don't usually go to games for story. You know me. I'm more about the mechanics and stuff. I like story, but just to talk about some of the games we've played that have had story, like I kind of mentioned in when I reviewed just not the same type of game, but when I talked about Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion, or even the original Gloomhaven, that the story didn't quite do it for me a lot of the time, and I think in that game, you're reading the story from a book. It's like you complete a scenario and you're reading, this happened, there's characters talking. Yeah. In this game, you're not reading anything, but this is some of the strongest level of storytelling and narrative and like world building that I've seen in any game, and nothing is something that you're reading. Everything is a result of the actions. You have a fight in a certain area, and then later on, that fight that happened in the Charming Valley, that was tough to leave the Charming Valley, like these thematic places and everything that happens tells its own story, and the story just emerges from what people do. And I don't think I've ever played a game that has that much story without any actual text telling you what's happening.
Yeah, like it's a story of your own creation. Like the more that you get immersed in you don't have to fully role play, but like the more you get immersed in what you're doing and really remembering certain things and letting that be part of the experience, I think is where you get the most out of both. The thing you mentioned about like the Charming Valley and stuff, like that is now an area that if it comes up for us in future games, we're going to remember the battles that happened in the Charming Valley. And just that is so unbelievably cool to me that we could have an experience where like remember and technically when you say remember in the last session, you'd be saying remember in the history books, right? Like remember in the history books the battle that took place in the Charming Valley, how this person became king. Like those things become part of your own lore that no one else who played Oath might have. And at the same time, if you're keeping the same group of people going, everything you're writing in the Chronicle becomes the history and the campaign and the story of the game, that instead of you having to read it, you've written it. You've written the story. You can go back, you can read it all after the fact, and you can remember that like this person became the Chancellor by pulling off this really deceptive technique, and that might have made it so that in later games someone doesn't trust them and stuff. Having certain locations out completely changes the story of the game. Like we had a card called Narrow Pass that like completely changed that game compared to all the other ones we played, because it made it this bottleneck where this, that's where everything was happening now, is in this pathway through the Narrow Pass to try to get to this one person. That didn't happen and wouldn't happen unless you had that card in the game, right? Having certain actual like denizen cards out and edifices and stuff will change how that game goes. Like I don't want to get into spoilers, so I'm not even going to say the specific one, but I had a card that completely dictated our entire game. Like I was unassuming, no one thought I was even in the game, and I flipped over a card and suddenly became the biggest threat. And it got to the point where the friend of ours was like, I'm actually okay with losing because this is like the perfect story. Like
that's the thing. The story was so good that it didn't feel like a cheap move. It was like, oh, what a lucky card or whatever. It was just like, wow, that's amazing. What an awesome thing to happen.
And that's part of our history,
story,
right? Yeah. And we should have said this at the beginning, but actually a big thanks to our two friends, Jake and Braden, who joined us for this entire journey so we could get a bunch of plays in and review this. But so that I think that's the biggest thing with the story is just it's a story of your own making, and I've never had a board game with that kind of experience.
And I'll say right now, like, there's going to be things we talk about later that we don't like, but for me personally, that's by far my favorite part about the game, and by far the most impressive thing about the game is just that level of immersion and narrative that comes out of all of the things you're doing. Never played anything quite like this in that sense.
Yeah. The next big thing that comes from that is multiple ways to win.
Yes.
I think that many games have multiple paths to victory. This is one of the only games I've played where they're just very drastically different ways to win.
And they're not always obvious.
No, and
right?
you play a game I reference this game a lot, but it's just one that works. Like Feast for Odin, right? Like there's multiple paths to victory. Like someone could be going more into like hunting, while someone could be going more into like livestock and things like that, right? And find different ways to get their point totals up. But the end goal is get the most points. In this, it's not like the end goal is get the most points. It's, yes, you're trying to become the chancellor, but you might be doing so by getting the people's favor and holding on to it. And we have to start discerning that that's what you're doing. Whereas I'm trying to gain the most territories or something, or put someone in a situation where they have to make me a citizen. Like, you can't account for everything until you've probably played this game a dozen times maybe. And so you're always kind of thinking like, what are they scheming? Are they actually out of the game? Are they like, is there something I'm not even aware of, that they have a card I haven't seen yet that's going to produce an opportunity for victory? Like, that to me is so exciting. And some might not like having to play, with the unknown of like, well, what am I even doing? But I feel like when you embrace the unknown a little bit and just, how am I going to win this game, and start trying to find your path, it might not always work, but when it does, man, is it satisfying.
For sure. Coming up not only with your own grand plan, but like you said, trying to figure out what other people are doing. And all that ties into one of my favorite moments in the game, going back to when you flip that crazy card that we're not going to get into too much about for the spoilers, is the kind of grand reveal. Is like when you know someone's cooking something up, you don't know quite what it is, and you're just waiting, and you kind of have your eye on them. And actually, there was last game we played, so there's these two banners. They're called the People's Favor and the Darkest Secret, okay? I'm not going to get too into these, but basically there's vision cards that can come up that if you own this, you win the game, and there's other ways that you can kind of fight to take these back from each other. And you had a card that said something with the Darkest Secret in front of you, an advisor card. And so I kept thinking, oh, Dylan's going to be going for the Darkest Secret. So I kept thinking, but then you flip this other card and did this other thing, and instead you went for the People's Favor, and none of us saw it coming. And it was this cool,
confused by like, why?
Yeah, and it was this big, but the reveal moment where you see someone flip this and they play their vision or whatever, and now it's like a next turn, if you guys don't stop me, I win, is like, oh shoot, we all sit there like, now the stakes are high. And now we know exactly what's going to be happening. I love that kind of reveal. All the victory conditions, the way that play in is an awesome part of the game.
Yeah, phenomenal.
Because you never know how it's going to end or when it's going to end.
Yeah, exactly. And then another great thing about this game is just how much variety and how interesting all the cards are. Like there's like, this is like the world deck we're looking at right now, right? So like there's a decent amount of cards here, but what you're not seeing is the fact that
I think they're all unique, right? Every single one
I'm
is
pretty
unique.
sure they're all unique. But what you're not seeing is the fact that there's like another stack that I think is larger than this in the box. And at the end of every session, depending on who wins and what cards they own, you're removing 6 cards from the deck and adding 6 cards in. And so you're constantly getting new cards that you don't even know until you see them for your next game. So there's always going to be an element of, I don't know what could come out. So instead of there being like this meta that develops where you say, okay, I'm going to play to this card and keep drawing until I get to this card or something, that card may have been removed. You don't know what other cards might be in there. And that creates this element of there's always discovery going on in Oath. And I would wager that it would take you lots of plays to get to the point where you've finally gone through every card. I don't even know how many that would take, because you're only adding 6 in. You're not even potentially seeing them in the next game.
Some might be more situational. There's that one that says like, if the narrow pass is available, you can ignore it. So the first time you play, you might not even have the narrow pass. So the ability might not really happen. And then the next time you play, you see the real potential of that card when the narrow pass is in play, or the cards that let you jump from one coast to another, or things that change the the basic rules of the game or what you're allowed to do. And there's these, we haven't gone over really yet, there's these different houses that have these different symbols, and they can change. There's favor that changes hands throughout the game so that you can access, basically ask certain houses to help you out, but then if you use them too much, they're kind of out of favor, so you can't rely on them anymore. So there's these changing things throughout the game too that are just really interesting to keep track of.
Yes, and then there's also relic cards as well. Like there's a lot of different cards, a lot of variety that can change up each game, and they're all interesting. Like I'm sure some are less interesting than others. There's some that we flipped over and we're like, oh, that doesn't really affect our game, but it could affect a game. And that interest is what makes it is just something that makes it so fun. Is like we've had games with lots of cards before where yes, there's lots, but it just feels like sometimes there's a lot for the sake of it. Whereas this,
they're all similar. Or whatever,
this you're being rewarded by everyone has its moment in the sun, I would say.
Yeah.
Depending on the game when it comes out, all of a sudden it could be the most important card, and in this game it could be the least important card, right?
For sure.
That keeps it really, keeps you on your toes. So
absolutely.
So those are all the main things I had for my things I like. Is there anything you wanted to add on, or did I cover most of them?
I think I just wanted to mention also the thing with the Chancellor and the Exiles and the Citizens is pretty cool. I like that aspect of being able to recruit and the negotiation. A lot of time it's just an interesting thing to try and figure out as players. Does this make sense to even be offered? Like, I think the first couple games we weren't really sure. It's like, should I be trying to offer citizenship? Should I not? It's kind of an interesting thing to try and navigate and figure out when and does it make sense. Or by offering this person, we had a game where someone offered citizenship and all this stuff, and then later they regretted. They're like, I gave you too much power. I should have negotiated differently. So even though it might end up being like you feel like you maybe made a mistake, it is a really fun thing to try and figure out. And even if you're not involved, I have to say one of the things I like a lot about this game is, we're going to talk later about downtime and length of player turns and stuff, but when it's not your turn, you're still involved. I never felt like I was just sitting there bored waiting for someone to do something, because even when you guys are making negotiations or I'm seeing someone plan their turn, I always feel like I'm invested in knowing what's going on.
Yeah, and especially even we played at 3, we played at 4, and it was interesting because even at 3, there's times where I was almost like, I wish I had more time to think about it between my turns, right? Like, it never felt like too much downtime because there's so much you're thinking about. Like, it works great at those, both those player counts. I'd imagine maybe when you get to we didn't play with 6, but at 6, it could probably get to the point where it's coming back to you and you're like, okay, I really want to take my turn. But at the same time, it's just interesting to watch everyone else see how the board's going to change by the time it gets to you, and what you're going to now have to react to and adapt to, right? So very good. So are we good to jump into the things we did not like?
I think so, yeah.
All right, so we're going to talk about all the things we didn't like about Oath.
I don't know about you, but I wasn't crazy about the king making aspect. So for those who don't know, king making is basically when you as a group are almost deciding who is king. So it's kind of like deciding who's going to win at the end. So what happens, we were talking before about the different victory conditions. So a lot of times someone will flip over a card and it's basically saying at the end of the start of your next turn, at your wake phase or whatever, you win the game if no one has stopped you, kind of thing. So a lot of the time when that happens, the game then becomes, if you're the next player before that player takes their winning turn, people might neglect their own duties and be like, I don't need to stop that person. When it gets to me, if after my turn that person's going to win, I might feel like I have to spend my whole turn now doing something just to stop that person. It might not actually help me win, but for the sake of the game, if I don't do that, the game will just end and we'll all lose. Right. So not only is it that sometimes as a group you start discussing, sometimes it feels like it becomes a sort of a cooperative game where 3 people are like, how can we stop that person? Oh no, but you should do this on your board. And then it feels like people are almost kind of taking part of each other's turns or suggesting stuff, and sometimes you're like, I would have maybe preferred to figure that out on my own. And it feels like the game is forcing you into, you don't have as many choices late in the game, right? Early on, you have this massive realm of possibilities. You can do anything, you can make whatever plans, and the later the game goes on, it feels like there's more things that you have to do that call for your attention. You have to go here to stop this person, or you have to do this, otherwise this is going to get out of control. Yeah. So it just felt a bit like that, and I also, making the kind of where it becomes a bit more cooperative and discussing together how to stop. I would have preferred we're all each maybe more doing our own thing and negotiating, but not helping each other figure out how to stop the one person.
Right. Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I don't think it bothered me as much, but I don't think it ever affected me as much in the games we played. I was trying to think about this after, and I think I didn't have to make as many of those decisions as you guys were, and just worked out that way. But I know what you're saying is it becomes less interesting and less exciting if all of a sudden you have to stop focusing on what you're doing and you have to just focus on, stopping someone else. But I do like when we got to the point where we're like, he's going to run away with it, and we all of a sudden did become cooperative. I actually liked that because I think the idea of a game flip-flopping temporarily to cooperative and competitive, and the fact that there are these allegiances that can sometimes form, someone can become a citizen and everything, the fact that led to, we had a game where someone was going to win and the only way they could get it, the chancellor was going to lose, and the only way they could not lose, potentially the only chance they would have was to make someone a citizen, and it might not work out, but it was the only chance they had. And they're they formed a pact, they seemed like they were going to work together, and then the citizen ran away with it. And it's I like that it becomes temporarily cooperative, but very uneasy alliances. I'm a fan of that. I agree that I wasn't a fan of when it gets to the point at the end of the game where it's well, who's going to be the one to stop him? And if these two don't, it's left to one person to basically say, either stop them or the game ends, right? Like that is not as interesting, but I don't think I did enjoy the dips to cooperative.
That's fair. And just to be clear, I don't think it's done poorly. Like if for people who like king making, this is done super well. There's games like people love this sometimes, and it's just, for me, it's something that I don't like, and something that you should be aware of going into it is like, as soon as you stick your neck out a little bit and show what your victory condition is, everyone's coming after you and there's nothing you can do about it. And you might sometimes have to drop your plans just to stop someone.
Yeah, for sure. Another thing we'll bring up is, because I think it's something that some might not like, is there's, like we mentioned, there's chances for this game to end very early. So there are 8 rounds, but as Carlo mentioned, there's this purple die, and you're going to start rolling it, I believe, on the 5th round.
End of the 5th round, yeah.
Yes, and so the first time you roll it, if you roll a 6, the game ends, and then the next time I think it's a 5 or a 6, and then it's a 3, 4, or 5 or 6. So there's a chance that at the end of round 5, you roll a 6, and the game ends. And that aspect,
and that would mean that the Chancellor wins, or I guess
correct.
the Usurper or whatever. But
yeah, the Citizen or whatever. But the fact that like the game can end that way, it's not that part that necessarily bothers me, because thematically it does kind of make sense. Like the kingdom's getting more and more stable, and there's a chance that it can, stabilize early, or it can take, the full length of the game to stabilize for the Chancellor. It's just the fact that it all comes down to a die roll that can be a little bit anticlimactic. Like, it's exciting to see if someone's going to roll it, but at the same time, you're planning all these strategies, you're having all this fun, there's all this tension and all this, like, narrative going on, and then you get to the end of the 5th round, and if you haven't stopped them from being able to do this roll, because it's, I should say, the roll doesn't always happen. If you've taken Oathkeeper away from the Chancellor, it might not be that they roll, but if it does happen, suddenly you could roll, and you could say, well, it's a 6, and you're like, oh, well, I was planning everything. It looked like we were about to get to the really interesting part of the game, and the game's over. So I feel like it's going to be not as often that is a huge problem, but its existence is going to inevitably make it so that some people are going to have a negative experience with it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And for me personally, it was only just the way that it was integrated, because I didn't mind. I think we both agree that we like what it does for the kind of the feeling of the squeeze at the end of the game, where, the stable kingdom, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. It was just the fact that I wish maybe there was a different way they could have done it with cards instead, or something that would have made it more thematic. Because even in the Chronicle, when you write it in, you're like, oh, we had this fight in the Narrow Pass and all this stuff, and then what? And then the die was rolled?
Yeah,
like, what's the thematic?
You have to say this kingdom is stabilized, but really what you're saying is we rolled the number on the die early or whatever.
Yeah, and it just felt like, again, for a game that did so many of these amazing story and narrative things, to have it just be a die that doesn't have any thematic integration just felt like a missed opportunity to maybe have something just tie in a little more to the story, to have that extra kind of powerful ending to the game.
For sure. And then the other one, I think we both agree on that, again, it might be, this is definitely something that probably improves over time, and especially if you're playing this, very often with the same group of players, this is your gathering game, it's very intricate. There are a lot of rules. There are a lot of specific rules that you can't even account for when you read the first rule book. You can get cards added into your deck, or have different territories now come up that you're never going to have seen before. So almost every game we played, we had to refer to the rule books. Mm-hmm. We had to refer to the appendix. We had to refer to things to get clarification. Yeah. It was a lot of, we even went to BGG and get clarification on different things. Like, there's so many specific things because of how intricate it is that I don't know how many plays it would take us to get to the point where we can confidently put the rule book in another room and never have to refer to it, right? Like, if you're not a fan of having to flip back and having that uncertainty and having to learn the rules still by the 3rd, 4th, 5th game, you might have some frustration. It could be very difficult because of that, to introduce new people into a group. Mm-hmm. If we had played, like you and me, like 5 games, and all of a sudden a friend of ours wanted to play for the first time, they're going to feel a little lost and a little out of it, and at a disadvantage. So I feel like, and I've heard that with Root, so I feel like that might even just be, a natural consequence of these type of games that are being designed, is that, they are fantastic games for the group that sticks around and plays over and over again, but for someone to now join that experience with a bunch of experienced players is probably going to be not as fun for them, right? So I think that's actually I would say even one of my higher up criticisms, because it would be great to have someone just like drop in and say like, yeah, join our oath group or whatever, but like, I don't know how I could do that and not have them feel like they're so lost I'd have to like play a lot lighter and less competitive to make them feel okay about that experience, right? So yeah. And we talk about player count as well. Like, we always like when games can accommodate
wider ranges of players, but in 2 to 6 we both agreed we didn't even really want to try it as a 2-player game with that Clockwork Prince system.
Yeah.
And that even with 5 or 6 we thought maybe 5 would be really good still, but 6 is like feels like it's going to be a bit of a slog, a lot of downtime, keeping track of what everyone's cards are and things that you know, it just feels like a little much. And so it's kind of a tough one. You have to decide for yourself, you know, but I think we liked it most at 3 or 4 and think that's probably the sweet spot for the game.
Yeah, I'll just say straight up, I don't ever want to play Oath as a 2-player game. I think I'm very impressed by the way they did the 2-player game, and I think that this brain that exists that, you know, only does certain things depending on the state of the board is super cool, and I commend them for doing that and giving that option. But this is not the type of experience I'm looking to play at 2 players. Like you lose the intrigue from everyone having their own goals around the table and everything like that. Like the more people you have, the more you're going to get of that. I think at 2-player, I don't think you're buying this for the 2-player experience. I think if you're, you know, thinking, oh, I'll play with it with 3 and up sometimes, but at the very least, I'll play with 2. I think you're probably going to have a lesser experience by a long shot compared to the one we're having. So I would say that that's not necessarily a negative as it is a caution. Don't get this to play as a 2-player only experience, in my opinion.
Yeah. I'd say maybe one more thing I'm not crazy about in the game, and it depends on the game, depends on the state of the game, who you're playing with, player count, and all that stuff. Sometimes the player turns, it's not necessarily that they are too long, because again, I mentioned there's a lot of stuff you can do and be keeping track of when it's not your turn, but because you only get at most 8 rounds in the game, and each of those rounds you're going to get 1 turn with a few actions that you do. And sometimes, depending if you have a bigger army on your board, you refill fewer supply for the next turn, so next turn you might only get 1 thing that you do, or 2 things instead. So everything you do, it feels like there's so much weight to it, because you're only going to do a certain number of actions in total throughout the whole game. And it just feels like there's this conflict in my mind between, usually the longer a game is, the less randomness I want, and the more I want it to be about like the mechanics and the strategy. And there's this weird thing where what I love most about this game is the narrative and the story, and I want to be able to just like enjoy the story regardless of whether I win or lose and regardless of how things go. But there's other times where you take a turn, and at the end of the turn you realize that you put yourself in such a bad state that you've either maybe not completely lost the game early, but you've just lost so much momentum. Like I had a turn where I built up my army, went and did all this stuff and went to fight a big battle, but at the end of your battles, if you don't have troops to actually put on the locations that you've won the battles, you can't rule those areas. So I basically spent my whole turn doing this, whatever, and then at the end of this, like whatever, however many minute turn, I realized I didn't even have the units to conquer the places that I won, so the whole battle was for nothing. And I just thought, well, I'm not going to ask to take my turn back, but like it basically was a wasted turn. And so I had to accept that we're playing this 3+ hour game where I probably don't have much chance of winning anymore, but okay, I'm in it for the story sort of thing. So it's just, I wish it was either maybe a little shorter, or that the turns were, maybe there was less to think of or something. It just, it's tough for me to,
and I think like over time,
wrestle with that.
Over time, I feel like the more you play Oath, the more that you'll understand some of these mechanisms and maybe have a better idea of when to fight those campaigns and when to hold back. Because I feel like we all made those decisions where we're like, we're going to do this, and all of a sudden by the end of it, we're like, that was not the best play by a long shot. Yeah. And you don't know until the end, and you're not going to ask to take back your turn because that's part of the experience. But I feel like you learn that as you go a little bit. Absolutely. But at the same time, it's not to say that it's not a good criticism, because I think to say, oh, it's not a criticism because after 5 plays it'll be fine. Well, you still have to go 5 plays with it.
Yeah,
right? It's not, that might be something that deters a lot of people and makes them, they might only play it 5 times.
But I think it is important to point out, though, the more familiar you are with that probably won't be a problem the more you play the game. But if you're only looking to dabble in it a few times, that might be an issue for you.
Yeah,
kind of thing.
For sure. So that's pretty much everything we didn't like. Again, I would say the big takeaway from the things we didn't like is just that, like, it is going to be a very involved experience. If you're not playing this with the same group, or at least with like some of the same members coming back and playing it semi-regularly, like once a month, or meeting a couple times every couple months or something, I think you're going to have a different experience with Oath. I think that's where the joy of it comes out, of creating this narrative with the same people, chronicling it in the book, and having these memories about the territories and the battles that took place and everything. And if you're not getting that, you might say, what is it all for? Why am I putting this much effort into learning and doing all this stuff just to have a subpar experience, right? That seems overly complicated. But in our case, we met with the idea of these same people and having this experience and carrying it over and writing the Chronicle. And like I said, I look back and read the stories we developed, and it's just, I have a huge smile on my face. I'm like, oh man, I remember that. Oh my God, that was the big turning point. Oh, and that person did this. Like, that to me is the biggest takeaway. If you don't have that, that's going to be something that you're just not going to have nearly as good of an experience with Oath as we did, right?
No, absolutely. Yeah. And think about any games we've played. I don't know, I shouldn't speak for you, but when I think we've had memorable game sessions. We've played games like Gloomhaven. We've played Legacy. You've played Pandemic Legacy. We've played games that have these amazing moments and stuff. And even though this isn't going to be like one of my favorite games or anything, the moments from this game, it's crazy how specific those memories are in terms of like, you remember exactly how that first game went down, and that second one, like, there's such a unique kind of like snapshot of how a game went down where it's so rare that I find myself thinking about the game this much afterwards, or that I have such a vivid memory of how exactly it went down rather than just, oh, there was that one turn in that one game kind of thing. But this feels like the whole thing is an experience that sticks with you, even if you like the game or not, it feels like.
Yeah. I totally agree. So let's get into the final little chapter of our video here, which is a couple different things, sort of a summary of our thoughts, but who do we, like, I think I talked about it a little bit now, but who do we think this game is for, right? For me, I'll just say a quick little thing, I'll throw it to you. Again, I think that if this is a game that you're adding to your collection when you have a massive collection like this, like, we're an interesting case because we're obviously content creators and stuff, but if you already have a massive collection, you just like having a bunch of games to play, and you're gonna kind of not play this game for a while, play this game a bunch, then kind of flip-flop, I don't think Oath is probably one that's necessarily going to have a good spot in that collection, because this sort of demands consistent play, at least like playing it every couple months. I feel like if you have to, the good thing is you can go back and you can read your Chronicle and remember, but you still want to meet with the same group, you still want to have those memories that you can associate with certain denizens and with certain areas on the board. So I think if you have a massive collection and you're not playing a game very frequently or multiple times very often, maybe this isn't the right one for you. Whereas would you agree that if you have one, like if you have less games but you're looking for a game that you can meet up and play consistently with the same group, like you would like Rising Sun and things like that, Blood Rage, that this is one that those people might be like very, very attracted to.
For sure. Although I would recommend it more heavily for those who like the kind of storytelling, whatever, rather than the fighty. If you like those fighty games, like you're talking Blood Rage, and even I think Root and stuff like that seems to be more like of a war game. This one is more about the Chronicle and the story that it tells and the kind of locations and everything coming to life. But it's definitely something that it will be best when you dive into it over and over with the same group of people. But I have to say, even just if you're in a position like us where who knows how many more times we're going to play this game sort of thing, for me, even if I never played this game again, I would feel like I'm totally, even the 15, 20 hours, however many hours learning the game, playing it, thinking about whatever, I have zero regrets. It's one of those things that everyone should, I think, experience as long as you're open to the kind of overhead of rules. Like if it's interesting to you and you're open to getting those 2 or 3 plays in at least to kind of like get the rules under your belt, even just if you're someone who just likes exploring what game design has to offer, you can't overlook this game. Like it's such an ambitious design. It's such a unique design. Hats off to Cole Worley for designing something like this and for it coming together this well, even though there are things that we clearly don't like about it or things that maybe just aren't quite for us.
I would say like the best way I could summarize it, at least for me personally, is that it may just be the most interesting board game experience I've had. Gloomhaven's up there for a lot of reasons, but I just feel like the uniqueness of this and what I'm taking away from it, and the reason I'm going to always remember this game and compare a lot of games to it, is just because of how interesting and memorable it is. It's gonna I don't think I will soon forget our plays, and we're gonna keep playing it obviously, but it's gonna be this story that I'm gonna constantly refer to with that group, being remember when that thing happened, remember when this happened. Like I just love that, and I think that, like you said, for that reason alone, I think a lot of people should at least find a way to try it and have that same experience and be able to, have the same memories.
Absolutely. So for you, if it was up to you, do you think this is something you would want to keep meeting up with a group and playing regularly kind of thing, or is it something that you'd like to maybe come back to every once in a while, never played again? Where do you kind of stand?
I mean, take away busyness aspect and life and commitments and stuff. I would love to meet up like once a month to play this game. I think once a month would be a good way to sort of like have enough time pass that it's almost thematically making sense with it being another generation. But at the same time, and having to refer to the Chronicle, but at the same time, not enough that you would have completely forgotten anything. I don't think I would forget rules with a month gap, like maybe small things, but if we started doing it consistently, I don't think it would be too big of a deal, and you're rediscovering every game anyways. But yeah, I would love, I'm always a huge fan of meeting up, playing the same game, and continuing a certain story. Like, that's why I love Gloomhaven. We have a bunch of campaign games coming over the next little bit. I would never say no to like continuing our story and writing new chapters in the Chronicle. So
fair enough.
Yeah.
I think I might like it just a little bit less than you, or at least maybe want to come back to it a little bit less than you. I've absolutely had a blast with this game. I've loved exploring this. Win or lose, it's always so fun having the kind of like the big moments that happen throughout the game. I just think for how long it is and for how much we still have been checking the rules, I don't think I'm going to be the person to suggest it, because next time we have, let's say, 3 hours free on a game night, there might be other games that I want to play more rather than, you know, getting back into Oath and having to check the rules again kind of thing. But it's something I've been so happy, and I feel so lucky to have been able to actually play a game like this of this quality multiple times over with people, because there's just so much to explore here.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, that's all our thoughts on Oath. So as you can see, we both liked it to different degrees, but obviously no game's perfect. So let us know in the comments where you land. How much did you like it? You know, are you still playing with a gaming group? If you do, how often do you meet? Like, tell us your experiences. If you want to get really in depth, put in the comments what like a really memorable moment from one of your games was, because there were some here we didn't share because we wanted to hold back from spoilers and certain things, but I would love to hear how other people's games have gone. I think I could read thread after thread of like experiences from Oath, because they're so unique and different every time. Right?
And that's maybe the coolest thing, is thinking that every single person who has a copy of it on their shelf might have their own unique thing in that box, because they have their own tales in the book. It's
trade Chronicle books and read a story, right?
Exactly. Everyone has their own unique story they're building, so just very, very cool.
Yeah, so that is our review of Oath. Let us know what you think, and again, thanks to Leader Games for sending us this. We are absolutely thrilled that we were able to check it out, and let us know in the comments what you think, and otherwise we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching.